I met him when I was 18. And I began in the year later, in 34, I began analysis with him. We went out there to the tower, and out of the bushes suddenly we were standing around kind of, you know, awkwardly as one does, not knowing what was going to happen. And then out of the bushes came a man, and I was deeply impressed by him. I thought naturally he was a Methuselah, because when you are 18, you think a 58-year-old is a ready for the cemetery. He told that story, which you can read in the memories, about this girl who was on the moon and had to fight a demon, and the black demon got her. And he pretended, he told it in a way as if she really had been on the moon and it had happened. And I was very rationalistically trained from school, so I said indignantly, but she imagined to be on the moon, or she dreamt it, but she wasn't on the moon. And he looked at me earnestly and said, yes, she was on the moon. I still remember looking over the lake there and thinking, and either this man is crazy or I'm too stupid to understand what he means. And then suddenly it dawned on me, he means that what happens psychically is the real reality. And this other moon, this stony desert which goes around the earth, that's illusion, or that's only pseudo-reality. And that hit me tremendously deeply. When I crawled rather drunk into bed because he gave us a lot of burgundy, that evening I thought it'll take you 10 years to digest what you experience today.
Both Jung and I minded most of all about wholeness, about becoming whole, and that I'd got at it through my art by always trying to draw or paint things that looked whole, animals, primitives, anything that seemed still at one with itself and whole. And he got at it by studying the things that were wrong with people, and then realizing the way to get it right was to find their wholeness, to find the opposite to the thing that was destroying them so terribly. And of course I went through tremendous encounter with the unconscious. One always does in analysis, particularly with him. He didn't let you pick flowers by the way, sort of.
When you met him in the club, or when you met him privately or in analysis, it was always a man interested in the, I would like to use a word, in the supernatural food. Always. Yeah. And to the depths. And you see, you could come into his room in analysis, and he was just speaking about the dreams you had had before, last night, not knowing them, but he was involved. He was so transparent for people. And that was a fascinating thing in the relationship with Jung. Therefore, everybody who knew Jung had the feeling he speaks one's own language.
We started talking, and I went home with him afterwards, and to Mrs. Jung's despair, we sat talking until about 3 o'clock in the morning without break. And again, it was I had this very strange feeling, although it was snowing outside, bitterly cold, that I was sitting around one of the first fires in a camp somewhere in the bush in Africa, talking, as you can only talk in those conditions. And I said to him, why don't you come back to Africa with me? He said, you know, when I came back from Mount Elgin and from Kenya and living amongst the witch doctors of Africa, he said, I found so much witchcraft in Switzerland I felt that I had to deal with all this witchcraft first before I could, before I can travel again. And he used to refer to himself as an old witch doctor. Very often when people asked him, are you a Protestant? Are you a Catholic? He said, don't ask me these questions. He said, I'm only an old African who finds his God in his dreams. And he really meant that. He really meant that. We had this tremendous human, almost animal warmth and immediacy. It was the immediacy of the laugh that got one.
Schopenhauer said that humor was the only divine quality of man. And that Basel helped him with a lot. Basel, the Baselers have an extraordinary sense of humor, and their carnival is really marvelous.
Jung took you there once to the
Yes, we did. A lot of us, we went there the night before and got up at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I think, to see the so-called Morgenstreich. And the procession comes through with lights. It's most impressive.
This feeling that he had, that if man lived his life religiously, if he lived his life symbolically, then it was almost as if what the theologians called God, and my Zulus called Mkulu, the first spirit, where the first spirit had passed over some of his power and some of his responsibilities to the human being, and that the human being had a God-like task to perform in creation, and the extent to which he performed it, he derived his meaning. It's a very important part of Jung's thinking.
Oh, well, I just paid a visit to him in Vienna, and then we talked for 13 hours without interruption.
13 hours
For
without
13
interruption.
hours without interruption. We didn't realize that we were almost dead at the end of it, but it was tremendously interesting. He was the old man and had a great experience, and he was, of course, way ahead of me, and so I settled down to learn something first. I had written that book that cost me my friendship with Freud because he couldn't accept it.
Yes.
To him, the unconscious was a product of consciousness,
Yes.
and it simply contained the remnants. I mean, it was sort of storeroom where all the discarded things of consciousness were heaped up and left. But to me, the unconscious then was already a matrix, a sort of basis of consciousness of a creative nature, namely capable of autonomous acts, autonomous intrusions into consciousness. Man's soul is a complicated thing, and it takes sometimes half a lifetime to get somewhere in one's psychological development. You know, it is by no means always a matter of psychotherapy or treatment of neuroses. It is all psychology has also the aspect of a pedagogical method in the widest sense of the word. It is something.
Education.
It is an education. It is something like antique philosophy, and not what we understand by a technique. It is something that touches upon the whole of man, and which challenges also the whole of man in the patient or whatever the receiving part is, as well as in the doctor.
One of the tremendous things which Jung did was to always emphasize the aspect of man's totality. And our totality is not complete unless we take our human failings into it. It doesn't mean that I necessarily have always to live my human failings. I obviously may have to take responsibility for them. But they are not only part of me, but they are part of every human being. That is to say, it is part of man.
Consciousness is one factor, and there is another factor, equally important, that is the unconscious, that can interfere with consciousness anytime it pleases. And of course, I say to myself now, this is very uncomfortable, because I think I am the only master in my house, but I must admit that there is another somebody in that house that can play tricks. And I had to deal with the unfortunate victims of that interference every day in my patients.
Analysis, proper analysis, particularly Jungian analysis, begins and ends with conscience. That is, that you take responsibility, that you take into consideration all those manifestations which so far have remained in the unconscious. In other words, you are not conscious of. And if you start taking responsibility for those manifestations, like shadow qualities and whatnot, then this is a very strong test for your conscience, isn't it? And so, I mean, you have to only have to think of the beginning of psychoanalysis. I mean, it took an enormous amount of moral courage to face these facts, which so far have not been considered or repressed.
I felt that Jung should tell me what I should do,
whether I should write a book, whether I should get a divorce, what I should do. And he wouldn't. And so I got mad at him. And I said, why is everybody so mean to me? And he said, why are you so mean to everybody? So I stormed out. And you got what I said there. I said to him, why is everybody so mean to me? And he said, why are you so mean to everybody? That was the trigger point. I was gone for a year. And I wrote him, oh, I don't know. Every now and then I'd sit down at the typewriter and write him what a son of a bitch I thought he was. And how when I first got to Europe, everyone thought he was a charlatan. I thought he was too. And I didn't, he was the most conceited, vain man. And I really had a great time.
And you sent all these letters?
Sent the letters, of course I did. And I thought, I hope he drops dead of a stroke. And I felt very good. I just felt fine. When I can get mad, I can lose 5 pounds just by getting mad. It's just the adrenaline goes, and I just think, it's the opposite of poor little me. And I don't care. Let the world go, stuff it up. I don't care what happens to me. And one morning I woke up, and I began to laugh. I thought, for God's sake, what's been going on here? What a jackass you. And suddenly I realized, surely he really hit it. And so I phoned Miss Schmidt, Fräulein Schmidt, and asked if I could have an appointment. And she laughed and said, oh, yes, she said, Professor Jung told me to save some time for you. He thought you'd be calling shortly.
And sometimes he'd be quite unfair to one. And he'd tell me, at the club, for instance, he'd go and something be horrid to people. And then he'd go home saying, now, wasn't that nasty of me? I really spoilt their weekend, and sure, it was always on Saturday evenings. But when they next came to analysis, he found that that particular nastiness was exactly what they wanted, what they needed. I really got more from Jung when he hit me over the head than any other time. I don't mean literally.
He had very small eyes, and when he looked through those little eyes, well, usually over the top of his eyeglasses, you knew that he was looking at something that you couldn't see. And what came out was usually some very simple fact. It wasn't any aura or any great message that came back from the beyond. It was something about your ordinary life or the ordinary situation. I described a party where I felt the shadow got loose with Jung in the center of it, where they threw a knotted towel from one person to another around a circle. Jung kept this thing going almost beyond endurance, and I fell down and broke my glasses, and somebody else skinned a knee, and at the end of the party we were all in shambles, but this was characteristic of Jung's intolerance of persona. He was so afraid that the party would stick on a polite persona level that he engineered it to bring out the shadow. And in the end, we all had a marvelous time. We all got drunk, and it was it ended very happily.
He became a human being, and a total one. I mean, he included everything. He could be terrible.
He could be terrible.
He could be absolutely terrible.
In these rages.
Yeah.
In these rages.
I remember one thing when we sailed on the lake up there, Bollingen, you know, in his boat, and there was a the wind died down completely, and we were way up from the Turm, you know.
I see. Yes.
Way off, and so there was nothing else but to row. And I was an old sailor, and you know, I knew how to row, indeed, better than he did, as a matter of fact.
And also young.
So I went and rowed, and he started criticizing me for every single part of a movement I made with those words. You know. And he knew it better, of course.
Oh, and did he row himself?
Joan was in the boat as well, my wife, and so it was absolutely, it was hell. It was real hell. Until I said, good, fine, do it yourself.
Yes, you
Sat
finally
down.
said. And he did it?
Yes, he had to.
Oh, he had to if you gave.
He
Yes,
had to.
Yes.
I wouldn't make one single move.
So, and did he ever apologize? For
No,
No?
never. Oh, he could be terrible. Oh, he could be real terrible.
When I was his secretary, he grumbled at me with a very loud voice, and he was, he didn't like when I took it personally, so I took it, and sooner or later there was a big and very beautiful, how do you say, Belohnung, recompense, a compensation. He compensated. He knew exactly what he had done, and then one was rewarded if one could stand it, and if one didn't took it personally. You see, he was so burdened by his ideas and by people outside and his inner figures. So I understood it quite well. He had to have a let out, ventil.
Ventilate.
And vent out.
Ventilate.
The steam has to go out.
Yes. And it sometimes came out on you when you were there.
Yes, why not?
Yeah.
The personal shadow is the personal shortcomings of things which every human being could be conscious of, which is not archetypal. For instance, such things as greed for money or jealousy, inferiorities which everybody has, but prefers not to know about. If one is jealous or if one is suddenly possessed by wanting money or so on, one could know about it if one is honest with oneself. But the collective shadow has to do with the dark side of the archetype of the self. That means it's the shadow of the God image. In the Christian tradition, it would be the devil. And that has always been personified and felt as something which has not to do directly with the human being. I mean, if somebody is possessed by the devil, he's much worse than just, he's not human, it's demonic. And, but on the other hand, generally that merges. First you have this area of dim, dark side, and behind it lurks the other. I've, for instance, seen that when Germany went to the devil in Nazism, people fell into it through their personal shadow. For instance, they didn't want to lose their job because they were clinging to money. That was their personal shadow. But then they joined in with the Nazi movement for that reason and did much worse things than they would have done normally under normal social conditions. So you can say the personal shadow is the bridge to the collective shadow, or the open door to the collective shadow. But the collective shadow comes up in those terrible mass psychoses. It's like if you have a room and there's one door not shut, and there the devil can come in. And if you know your personal shadow, you can shut all the doors.
I think that it's quite an important fact historically that there were very few of us that intentionally became analysts. What happened was that we all had neuroses, and we were nice, fat, juicy ones, and we were vibrating like an Aeolian harp in a high wind. And very often this was exacerbated by a marriage relationship. And so that most of us of my generation didn't prepare to be an analyst, but we went to an analyst so that he could tinker with our psyches. And somewhere along the line we'd say, wouldn't it be peachy if I could be one of those too?
I have to remember our first appointment, because Joe and I went together, and he talked right over the top of my head to Joe, arranging my appointments. And I finally said, well, where do I come in? And he said, oh, that comes later. And I'll never forget that.
Jane and I arrived in Zurich in 1932. We had a very deep bond between the two of us, but we also were very dissimilar. And so we got into horrendous clashes and crashes. We just were anxious to get a hold of something that would give us some tools to work with so that we could resolve these clashes.
I was not so enamored of him at first. I thought the way he talked, no, it was his writing. Of course, it was very intuitive writing. It wasn't my dish. And I kept thinking, who the hell does he think he is? You know, how do you know what he's saying? I mean, how does he know what he's saying is right? And I was really very resistant.
It is almost a rule, but I don't want to make too many rules. In order not to be schematic,
yes.
That an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the counter type to complement himself.
I thought, well, he's just talking through his hat, and I just can't go for that stuff. Until I got in trouble and had him head on, and then, my God, he just made all kinds of sense. I liked his opening comment. He said, oh, so you're in the soup too. I like the two. Yeah.
The archetype is a force. It has an autonomy. It can suddenly seize you. It is like a seizure.
Yes.
So, for instance, falling in love at first sight, that is such a case. You see, you have a certain image in yourself, without knowing it, of the woman, of the woman.
Yes.
Now you see that girl, or at least a good imitation of your type, and instantly you get a seizure, and you're gone. Yeah. And afterwards you may discover that it was a hell of a mistake. Or you see, a man is quite capable, he's intelligent enough to see that that woman of his choice, as one says, not no choice, he has been captured.
Yeah.
You know, he sees that she is no good at all, that she is a hell of a business. And he tells me so, and he said, for God's sake, doctor, help me to get rid of that woman. He can't. He's like clay in her fingers. And that is the archetype. That is so-called archetype of the anima.
Yes,
yes. He thinks it is all his soul, you know. Like the girls, you know, when a man sings very high, then he thinks he must have a very wonderful spiritual character because he can sing the high C.
Yes.
And she's badly disappointed when she marries that particular number.
Yeah. Well,
that is the archetype of the animus.
Yeah.
This is built right into the center of Jung's whole psychology, that one should develop one's contrasexual components, as Margaret Mead so quaintly phrases it. But Jung prefers to talk about the animus and the anima, meaning the feminine side of the masculine side of the woman and the feminine side of the man. And so that all of us who are really committed and involved in the Jungian world are very busy trying to develop our animuses or our animas, and we don't ever expect that it's going to be quite a dead heat, and that our voices will alternate from soprano to basso, or that we are going to get a reissue of our vital parts. But on the other hand, we do feel that usually going on a two-step operation, first with the projection of one's anima or one's animus, and then the gradual peeling of it off and taking it back in again and assimilating it and hopefully integrating it into one's consciousness, that this androgynous or almost androgynous state of being is the way one hopes to be before they throw the switch.
In the beginning stages of a relationship, there's generally a lot of projection mixed up with it. And that is responsible for all those love quarrels. I mean, she makes demands which he can't fulfill, and he makes demands she can't fulfill, and animus anima, crossing the swords. And I mean, if you tape record a love quarrel, it's the same all over the world, literally. And that is projection. And if people don't run away but work it out and take back all what is projection in it, then appears or is peeled out of all this the true relationship. Now it might be none. And then it would be like the Freudian thing, goodbye, and now I see you simply represented that and that in me, and thank you very much, goodbye. Or there might be a tremendous amount of relationship, true relationship built up, which is not the same thing as projection.
The intensity of our struggle suddenly became clear to me that Jane had a thinking function developed, and I had a developed feeling function. And of course that was upside down. Everybody knows that men think and women feel, only what didn't happen to be so with us.
But I think that what he did for women came through his tremendous interest in the individual. And women could be individuals too. And this problem of what is feminine and what is masculine and so forth and so on almost came as second to that. Mm-hmm. So I think in a sense, and then of course his discovery of the animus and the anima, that did a lot.
Jung was not apt to be a father figure. He was in an astonishing way near to you. Natural. He could sit down and after 10 seconds you felt to speak with a brother, not with a father. And if you have had this brother relationship to him, where you discussed in a free way, where you accepted that he got angry, where you also were ready to get angry at him, as men do in an upright, clear way, it was easy to get along with him. But the moment where one thought that he was a father figure, he was for men very destructive. Because he was too irrational to give a guidance as a father. He changed too openly, too often his mind to give such a guidance. That's a natural thing to change one's mind. That's a normal thing. But a father should give a certain guidance. And he had no intention at all to give a guidance. So for men, it was often difficult because the moment men look, and many men look for a father, whereas with women it went along much better because a woman doesn't look so much for a father, she looks for a lover. And he was charming, seducing, and there he offered transference, often a little bit too much. But with a great healing power. With a great healing power.
Well, what about the atmosphere in Zurich at that time?
Well, that's what put me off. Oh, the cultism was just reeking. It was just awful. There were the transferences. And I swore I would never get a transference. That one thing I decided right away, because it just looked too awful. I mean, these people were just goofy. And, but I got a transference.
Couldn't help it.
Couldn't help it. Because, I mean, after all, you get a transference because what's missing in you has got to be seen in somebody else. And there was plenty missing in me, you know, and with a man of Jung's caliber, there's a lot missing.
It is a regular observation that when you talk to an individual, and this individual gives you insight into its inner preoccupations, interests, emotions. In other words, hands over his personal complexes. Then you get slowly and nilly-willy into the situation of a sort of authority. Yes. You become a point of reference. You know you are in possession of all the important items in a person's development. Now you see, that creates an emotional relationship to the analyst. And that is what Freud called the transference. Yes. Which is a central problem of analytic psychology. It is just so as if these people had handed out their whole existence, and that can have very peculiar effects upon the individual. Either they hate you for it or they love you for it. Yes. But you are not indifferent to them.
But I never felt as though I had too much transference. It didn't last too long because Jung, the one nice thing about, or the good thing about him was he gave so much of himself. He just gave you everything he had. So it wasn't as though you had a hangover. You got it all, you know?
I never felt in awe of him. I just thought sometimes he was funny. When we used to have a little argument about God, he said, you know, I'm not so sure about God. I'm perfectly willing if he shows up, fine. I used to say to you, of course, if he shows up, he'll probably look like you. And, but I guess that I thought before I got mad at him, I thought that he would have some kind of a solution to life's problems. Then I found I had to find the solution myself, which I suppose was what he did, brings you to that point.
We didn't know whether we were fish, flesh, or fowl, and we had to find ourselves anew. I dreamt that Jung was a Protestant clergyman standing at a pulpit, giving a sermon, and we were all in the pews, and when he finished his sermon, all the others got up and began to chant mandala, mandala, the way they might in Christian times have said Hosanna. And this represented a worshipful attitude to Jung that was laughable, as you can imagine. So I thought, I hate to tell Jung this dream, but I did. And he said, well, of course you should feel that way. I was simply projecting my own Protestant background, making Jung a father figure, making the other people into a group, which they were not.
Freud always wanted to break a transference and to
resolve it.
To resolve it and to bring people to life again, down to the adaptation to life again. But Jung had another point of view, had the feeling as long as we have a strong transference, one must serve it, because he said there is a greater personality involved in transference. And we don't know what this greater personality has in storage, and so we must serve it. And that was tremendously difficult for Jung. He often told us, you see, I should have 10 lives in order really to follow the development of the integration process so deeply as he did with us all.
Yes.
But that was also what interested him. He many times said, without you women, I couldn't have developed my psychology.
I had a case that was an intelligent young woman. She was a student of philosophy, very good mind, where one could expect easily that she would see that I am not the parental authority. But she was utterly unable to get out of this delusion. And in such a case, one always has recourse to the dreams. It is just as if one would ask the unconscious, now what do you say to such a condition? You see, she says of the unconscious, of course I know you are not my father, but I just feel like that. It is like that. I depend upon you. And I say, now we will see what the unconscious says. Now the unconscious produces dreams in which I really assumed a very curious role. You know, she was the little infant, she was sitting on my knees, I held her in my arms, I was a very tender father to the little girl, you know, and more, her dreams became emphatic in that respect, namely that I was a sort of giant, and she is a very little, frail human thing, you know, and quite a little girl in the hands of an enormous being. And the last dream of that series was, I cannot tell you all the dreams, was that I was out in nature. I stood in a field of wheat, an enormous field of wheat that was ripe for harvest. And I was a giant. And I held her in my arm like a baby. And the wind was blowing over that field of wheat. Now, you know, when the wind is blowing over wheat field, these waves in the wheat field. Yes. And with these waves, I swayed like that, putting her as if it were to sleep, you know. And she felt as being in the arms of a god, of the Godhead. And so now the harvest is ripe. And I must tell her. And I told her, you see, what you want and what you project into me, because you are not conscious of it, is you have the idea of a deity. You don't possess. Therefore, you see it in me. That clicked. She certainly became aware of an entirely heathenish image that comes fresh from the archetype. She had not the idea of a Christian God or of an Old Testament Yahweh. It was a heathenish God, you see, a God of nature, of vegetation. He was the wheat himself. He is the spirit of the wheat, the spirit of the wind. And she was in the arms of that Newman. No. Now, that is the living experience of an archetype. Now, that made a tremendous impression upon that girl, and instantly it clicked. She saw what she really was missing, that missing value, that was in the form of a projection in myself and made myself indispensable to her.
Yes.
And then she saw it is not indispensable, because it is, as the dream says, she is in the arms of that archetypal idea. Now that is a luminous experience, you see. And that is the thing that people are looking for.
Yes.
An archetypal experience that gives them an incorruptible value. You see, they depend upon other conditions. They depend upon their desires, their ambitions, depend upon other people, because they have no value in themselves. They have nothing in themselves. They are only rational, and they are not in the possession of a treasure that would make them independent. But when that girl can hold that experience, then she doesn't depend anymore. She cannot depend anymore, because that value is in herself. And that is a sort of liberation. Yeah. And that is, of course, makes her complete, you know. Inasmuch as she can realize such a luminous experience, she is able to continue her path, her way, her individuation. The acorn can become an oak and not a donkey.
If you have a relationship to C.T. Jung, then you have to work on it, and the meaning is a result, perhaps, you see. I can say I projected on him a father, but I also projected on him a mother, you see. And the one who accepted me, I could say. And from this, in the course of the years, I found a place in this world. I found a place in myself and in the world.